I continued with like a physical therapist in Savannah, and again, more training, but it always seemed like I only got so far. And there was a lot where people just didn't have, just didn't have answers. We're doing the best we can. Later on, I've had to work through a lot of like traumatic memory associated with how much I was overriding some of the signals. And we talk about this because it's such a nuanced thing, right? Because there are times where where you're stretching yourself and showing yourself, no, see, I can do this. I'm safe. But there was also a degree to which I was like, we were just trying to make me physically well and pushing past all of the reasons my body was doing that.
Which we know is actually part of the problem of how you got there in the first place.
Exactly. So that can't be the solution because that's what led me there.
Yes.
Right?
Welcome back to the Mind Change Podcast. I'm Heather McKenzie, and today we're talking with McKenzie Brewster and her journey with dysautonomia. So, we talked about in one of the previous episodes my journey through all of the various myriad of medical conditions.
Yep.
And part of what brought you here and into the mind change space was your own journey through chronic illness.
Yes. And it's funny because even as cameras were rolling, we were just talking about, okay, how do I want to box this? How do I want to categorize this? Because there was a time where I really identified with certain diagnoses, but then there was a point where I started to kind of push away from them. And in part, it was because it's not like, it doesn't really encapsulate it enough, right?
Right.
And so it expanded, and then I was like, I like this more. And then I started picking up.
So what was the original diagnosis?
Well, even getting a diagnosis was a huge part of the struggle and journey. It ended up being POTS, but they like categorized it as chronic autonomic instability. And then I later started picking up like Ehlers-Danlos, and then it was do it masked T cell, yes or no, like all that kind of stuff. It's interesting to me that I never did Lyme. Like, I don't know how I kind of slipped through that one because so many people I know have ended up doing it, but maybe it was just the timing of the information I took in. But it started for me. Right?
I know.
Right? Because I can look back earlier and I can see, oh, okay. Oh, I was getting strep throat every 3 or 4 weeks when I was in elementary school, and how young I would do like chronic ear infections. I had a tonsillectomy. And I would regularly sprain my ankle.
That's the one. It's so funny. That's the one I remember. I was like, how does someone have that sprained ankle pretty much all the time? Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, regularly, and kind of a little bit known for being here I am with my bum ankle again. I have a friend who still does an impression of me from middle school like that. Yeah, and then and would go to the nurse's office regularly in 5th grade. Also, there's a lot going on environmentally where all my friends were moving. There was a lot going on in my community at that time.
Which now we look back at.
Yeah.
Now we look back and connect the dots and see the patterns, but
then
at the time, no.
None. No. And so, but really, and I get the flu, I get sick, I get run down semi-regularly, but it wasn't like I was sickly or anything. Started getting more tired at times, but at the same time, I went to an arts high school. I was a vocal major. I sang in a girls group. I sang with a jazz band. I was just starting to get into theater. I did competitive weightlifting. That was my sport. Loved that. And then about the time that I was 17, my junior year of high school, I got sick with like mono. And didn't completely seem to bounce back. And then I got the flu and I bounced back a little bit less. And then we were moving into winter and I started to be kind of in and out of school. And by the time I reached like March, I was really in and out of school. And I remember one day going in and I just like, I didn't quite understand what was happening. I started to get a bit like weaker. I was just having such a hard time, even just like kind of making it through. And I left school early one day. And I think at that point, uh, I can't remember. It's kind of fuzzy now. Like, I don't remember if I was crying or not, but I remember a classmate being like, yeah, we're praying for you or something like that. And I was like, wait, what? Like, you guys, do I not realize what's going on? Does somebody else realize that there's something bigger going on here than me?
Oh, I'm that kid.
What's going on? And at that point, I remember one weekend I went home from school and, oh no, I had like 1 or 2 weeks where I bounced back just a little bit, enough to go on a field trip, right? And I got so sick after that, came home, and I didn't really get back up.
What did that look like for you? I got really sick. Like, what was
Yeah. I was so tired. I was just so tired. I could barely move. It started to become difficult to walk. It was like I could never fully go to sleep, but I was never fully awake. I was really dizzy. I started having like heart palpitations. I'd like a lot of like sensitivity all over my body. And then I'd get like feverish. It was almost like having a really bad flu. I didn't venture towards so much like vomiting kind of stuff, but it was, it was a lot more like heart and just utter weakness. And it got to the point where I remember there was a time where my goal each day was to try to open my eyes for stretches of time. Like I could barely sit up and it was just like I wasn't fully conscious and I could barely sit up in bed without just basically passing out.
What was going on in your mind at that time? Do you remember having any thoughts or any mantras or?
Yeah, I think I was scared about school too, because I was in my junior year and each time I was like, I don't know how I'm going to catch up. Like I can barely look at the paper. I can barely hold a pencil. What's going to happen? And we just didn't know what was going on. And I didn't think that I was dying. But I realized later that there were people around me who didn't know that I wasn't dying. And so we just didn't know what was happening. And I think the mystery of it was like kind of devastating. And we'd go to specialist after specialist, and to even just get in to see the specialists became a full-time job for my parents. I think my dad like waited in someone's waiting room until they would put me in to see them when it wouldn't be 6 months later, where it's like, but the condition she's in. Eventually we ended up, after getting advice from a friend of mine's dad, who's a physician, took me to an urgent care system, like brought me to the emergency room in Atlanta just so that I'd get admitted to CHOA so I could get in. I remember that the drive there being one of the like lowest points of my life, just feeling just so utterly sick. And there was a part of me that had a little bit of a fear of, oh my gosh, is this my fault? Is this my fault?
What do you think?
Where did that come from?
Yeah.
Well, okay, so there would be this idea of I was burning the candle at both ends. This is what I get. I was overworking. I was a bit of a perfectionist, and perfectionist procrastinator. I'd push off my homework and then I'd stay up because it had to be just right. And if I didn't stay in fantastic academic standing, here catastrophe would happen. I didn't. There was also a level to which I was so kind of dissociated. I was so checked out that I didn't even totally know. I don't remember all of what I thought, but there was this underlying fear of what if this is my fault? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What would you have thought it was what were you doing? Like, was it just simply, I was overdoing it, I was overworking?
I was overdoing it. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Where did that come from, do you think?
The overworking?
That thought of even, how does a young person,
A 17-year-old woman, young
right,
woman? Yeah.
fear working themselves to the point of burnout, complete burnout?
Yeah. I mean, like, I remember like parents saying things like that. But there was also this sense of, well, a little bit of what's wrong with me? Because all my friends did even better than I did academically, and they were doing more, and I couldn't seem to do things to the same level. Right?
Gosh, you wonder, chicken or egg there.
Uh-huh.
Do I believe I can't do things to the same level and that there's something wrong with me? And therefore my body responds.
Or
Or
is it that my body's doing this and that's why I'm not moving through things to the same level?
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Did you have any other framework of chronic illness?
Yes, I did. I had quite a lot. So that totally factors in. I had a really good friend growing up who had bits of chronic illness and ended up kind of going out of school, and we were really close. And I think that was an influence that I had. Like that's one thing I saw. Looking at it now, this is nothing on them. This is part of something that my mind did. I can recognize there was some underlying fear of like growing up and doing things on my own and like about my own like sense of power and ability. And there was a part of me that clocked that meant that was a way in which you were innocent and protected.
So it's so interesting. Gosh, I love this stuff, right?
Right.
Because it really speaks to the trust.
Yeah.
Like, am I trustworthy? Do I have what it takes to complete these goals in front of me, in the long run? And if we aren't, if there's somehow it's reinforced that maybe we're not trustworthy, maybe we're going to make mistakes, maybe we don't have the level of knowledge or maturity, or things are so dangerous out there.
Which is funny because it's also couched with so much of the like identity that I had and the praise, right, was how I was so mature for my age, how much I did, like really accomplished. That was my friend group, very trustworthy. Like that was so much of there's this contrast that exists within the two and creates this tension.
Tell me I'm just making a connection here. Tell me the diagnosis again was
chronic autonomic instability. So my body's doesn't know how to respond to the situation. It's jumping between two different extremes, and neither is the appropriate response.
Do you hear, like, I'm hearing that,
right?
Like, I'm hearing that. The metaphoric representation of what our body does is such a actual beautiful, the results don't always feel nice.
Right.
But you're like, oh, I see what you were doing there to show me. And it's interesting because you mentioned I was so dissociated.
Yeah.
Which is part of why our body needs to speak so loudly because we're dissociated and we're not hearing what the real message is.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. So then take me to the lowest of lows.
Yeah. Oh, I wanted to say though, but because you had asked, did I have any other references for chronic illness? And I had a lot. And I think I laughed a little bit at one point because I was like, wait, I want to make sure that you say this is one of your diagnoses, right? Because I think it was after coming to see me, after I had POTS, I'd gotten diagnosed with POTS, that you ended up adding that onto your list.
Did I?
You came to my parents brought you in for my high school graduation.
Yeah.
And it was like the big hurrah that I walked like 8 feet across the stage. I was so determined, right? And like collapsed into a wheelchair afterwards. But you came up to be there, and it was not terribly long after I had gotten the diagnosis, but it was right before you bottomed, and you ended up contacting us later because I think we like shared with you about that, and you're like, so I ended up doing like I have POTS too.
Yeah. See, oh my gosh, it's so fun.
But yeah, a lot of in the community that I grew up in, there were a lot of women in leadership who were ill. And it was kind of, and just people in general who were praised were people who had overcome things or who were like great despite their struggle. And a lot of those struggles were health issues.
Yes.
And so, again, conscious of it at the time? Absolutely not. Not at all. Now looking back, I realize how some of that colored the influence of what I thought it meant to be valuable.
Wow.
And I remember there being a point where, I didn't do the thing where like I became a part of like a chronically ill community that didn't really resonate with parts of what being ill was giving me.
You isolated.
I isolated, and it was easier for me. I remember there being a time where my mom had like tried to make connections, and I was like, honestly, like thinking about people that way makes me feel sadder and sicker. And it's hard enough like being as sad as I am for me, that to care for people like that is too much for me.
Wow.
And that was a big thing too, a big part of what I thought it meant to care. Like I was like, I need to feel your feelings, right? I remember there being sometimes things about like natural disasters, and I would feel bad that I didn't feel bad enough.
Right.
So I would then try to make myself feel bad because I thought that's what it meant to be good. Again, not so much consciously, although I remember there being times of like checking in and recognizing that. And I thought, I'm a bad person. I don't care enough.
Because you're not experiencing the natural disaster in your own mind and body.
Yes.
Wow.
So there was a framework of that was part of what care was. So to understand people, to empathize was let me reproduce what you're going through within me.
Yeah. One of these episodes is going to be about how we feel about empathy, the way the world holds empathy.
Yes. And
but we're not going to get into it right now.
And how that all relates into attachment theory. Yes. So those are retrospective insights. There are other aspects of, dynamics, emotional dynamics around me. But at my sickest, I could barely talk. Like when I talked, it sounded as if I were drunk. I barely had enough strength to move my tongue. My friends would like laugh sometimes, or my friends would come over. I had a really wonderful group of friends, and they would come and just like hang out with me and just be with me while we were like watching something on the couch. And it would be as if I weren't like, it was as if I were sleeping some of the time.
I was there too.
Yeah, you were. That's right.
That's how I first saw Gilmore Girls, actually. And I remember you were like so onto the couch.
I was completely horizontal.
Yeah. Yep. Like so one with the couch. And every once in a while you'd sort of lift up a little bit and sort of say something. And then I was like, wait, did she sleep? Was she awake?
Yeah.
Like a couple of words would be, you were done.
Yeah.
It was like that was the output energy, at least for the next hour.
Yeah. I remember there being a time where I would calculate, do I have enough energy to turn over in bed?
Jeez.
Yeah.
Like,
I'd be like, okay, because this is what's going to happen with my heart when I do that, right? This also ties into that thing where you get that hypervigilance where you're on the lookout for anything. And the way that you interpret the signals of your body then becomes a confirmation bias for what's wrong instead of, oh, this is the natural process, or, oh, this is how I build strength, right? Like what that uncomfortability means. Like, like when you have a scab, does it itch because it hurts, or does it itch because it's healing? And so that it all just kind of, it's a reinforcement of itself, and like just in this kind of feedback loop when you have certain beliefs. So part of what I'd been told was that essentially it was as if I were allergic to gravity. And if that's not a metaphor for thinking that the forces of the universe are not for you but against you, I don't know what is. So
I know, yeah.
Right? So, and that my heart was essentially, it was like my heart was two sizes. I was like, they had just come out. So by the time I got a diagnosis, I had a wonderful doctor. I forever just like love him. What was great is I really had, I will say, although it sounds like I'm like nothing, there was this drive within me kind of all along to be well. At varying times that rose and fell, but I really like looked at, I'm like, okay, so here's what I'm doing. Okay, here's what I understand. Here's what I'm learning intuitively. Here's what I think we should do next. What do you think? Like it was really like a partnership kind of thing, which is common for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But 2 weeks before I got my diagnosis, a new article had just come out where they were talking about POTS and named it the Grinch syndrome, because it happens to astronauts, right? They go to space. Their body doesn't have to deal with gravity anymore. They get a little deconditioned, and they come back and they have to relearn how to compensate. Their body has to relearn how to compensate for it. So you exercise, you build up your heart mass, you retrain your system, and you should be mostly good. So my heart was 2 sizes too small, essentially, and it was this idea that I had a probably genetic predisposition, kind of leaned that way, and then met the right circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
And so it wasn't like any one thing did it, but that it was just simply unveiled when I hit a level of deconditioning. And it was also interesting because even at that point, they started making correlations between certain personality types who would venture towards these kinds of illnesses. And I was like, oh, wow, I really fit that profile. That's interesting.
Just for a minute, how amazing is it that they're starting to look for things outside of just the physical?
Yeah.
Like that's
definitely
so important
Mm-hmm.
and now then usually when we fall into very boxed categories with that information, but if we start to see that it's information and it's feedback,
Right.
and maybe that's actually the problem rather than part of the solution.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway.
Yeah, it becomes something that you can work with. It's an indicator of what's going on, how all these systems are working together.
Yes. And what makes someone that personality type, maybe even getting like deeper.
Yes. Uh-huh.
Saying that's really the contributing factor.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So I was given the prognosis that my recovery would be slow, but then there would reach a point where I would get exponentially better. So that was the framework that I had. And I was like, great, awesome. Any month now, I'm going to be mostly better. And, it would then unfold of like, okay, so some stuff you're probably going to deal with to an extent for most of your life. And there'll be things you have to be careful, like, and be, mindful of and take really good care of yourself. But like, mostly you'll be there. Okay. And month after month would pass. And again, at the time, there wasn't a lot of information. Like there's more now, but even in like 2 weeks before I got that diagnosis, it was, oh, this is the kind of exercise you should do to help build your heart mass. Everything in your body is going to tell you not to do this, but you kind of need to override that. And okay.
Catching on those.
Right. Yeah. But you need to just keep doing it and you'll build up your stamina and you'll reacclimate, right? Just like an astronaut would. So I did that. I took what I was given and put it together myself. When I started, I was in so I had done competitive weightlifting and I went back to that gym, and a lot of the lifters were nurses too. So I had people, and they worked with people who had special needs. I had a lot of helpful eyes on me and a little bit of extra guidance. But I couldn't get to the reclined bicycle that they had. So sometimes my old coach would bring it like to the front of the gym so that I'd only have to walk like so many steps with someone like half carrying me to kind of collapse into it. And I started with 2 minutes and with the seat back entirely. It was like I was horizontal and my legs were down, like at the pedals, and had to slowly work up. Now, I did continue to get better. I made progress, but like 2 years later, like I'm doing so much better is, wow, I can sit up for 20 minutes.
Right. That's the measure of better.
Yeah.
And that's what we're supposed to feel really good about.
Well, I had a little bit of this mindset of like, anything I have is great. Like, look on the positive. Isn't that like, but look how much better I'm doing. And I think I remember my parents at one point saying, "Ooh, this makes me just a little bit emotional," being like, but that's not a really good quality of life. Like, it should be, yeah, you're better than you were, but you're not well.
Right.
And so I went into there's a whole story there, of course, as there normally is, of a trade-off with, there was another girl at my school, in my program, like a year or two younger than me who ended up getting the same diagnosis. Now, how we did things exactly was a bit different, but we were like, became friends. So that I didn't have the like generalized community, but I had people.
Yeah.
Right. And a guy that I'd been like on a date out with once when I was a teenager had the same ended up having the same diagnosis. And so, but I saw him getting better and doing stuff. So for me, there were points of like, oh, okay. Oh, I can get better. All right. Oh, cool. You got your pilot's license? All right. Like there's a lot of hope moving forward, right? But this other friend had like I didn't use my legs a lot because I would just like collapse, right? It was like I was so weak. It was like I was constantly passed out. I think she had like lost feeling in them at one point and ended up going to the Children's Hospital of Atlanta. Now, I think I said one of my lowest points when we just didn't even know what to do. My family had driven me to the Children's Hospital of Atlanta and checked me into the ER, but it was a weekend. And so there weren't a lot of people to be able to see me to do anything. We could wait till Monday for like maybe a rheumatoid
arthritis
doctor, rheumatologist. Thank you.
Rheumatologist. Okay.
But there just weren't really like, they didn't really have answers. And so we had been like, forget that. Right. But my friend ended up going into this program and she was the first with that kind of diagnosis that she'd had and went through a physical therapy program and she was walking again. And they're calling us and they're like, she's walking again. I think you should check this out. So I went in and you'll see especially why I'm sharing this soon. And I learned to like retrain my nervous system. And like we did like I had the support of doing physical therapy. There'd been one point where we'd looked at a program in the Mayo Clinic, but after my experience of just trying to like be in the car to get to Atlanta, I had been like, that seems terrifying.
How did they explain that you're going to retrain your nervous system through
They
physical?
didn't. Yeah, I don't know that they said that. I think that's the terminology that I probably tag on now, although they understood that it was like a form of dysautonomia. I was the second person that they'd had with this diagnosis, right? So a lot of it was experimenting, but it was basically just, we're going to like, essentially just showing me that I actually could do things.
Wow.
Like, okay, I had a gait belt, right? And so it's like, all right, you walk. And what they taught me was like, okay, you think you're just going to collapse. But there is a moment, there is a small window in which you get to make a choice. You have the power to make a decision and you can stay standing. And it was capitalizing on that over and over again until it was like, okay, no, I'm here, while building, like doing physical things, helping improve my balance, building up my physical stamina. And then like, okay, so you're going to make a sandwich.
What I hear though, what you just said about that belt.
Yeah.
And that,
they would hold it
forward,
in case if I fell, they would like keep me up for a moment.
But it's what I hear you saying, and so correct me if I'm wrong, is that maybe they didn't say it and maybe you didn't even know it at the time, but it sounds like what you got from that was that your body will do, like it's going to take that step. It's not going to let you fall. Like your body's it can do this.
Yeah.
And once you know that.
Yeah.
It's going to keep happening.
Yeah.
So it's almost like going back and retraining that your body is trustworthy.
Yes.
And naturally.
I mean, yeah, to a degree. I think it was also really interesting being there because I got to see a variety of young people working through issues. And there was a young woman who had been in like a bit of a soccer accident or something, hunched over and would like scream in pain if she had to like try to stand up more at all. It had become so conditioned that way. But I got to watch the like emotional dynamics of what was happening. And they would say, that's what she believes. Right.
Wow.
And so So that introduced me to that. And I got to watch it play out of, oh, you have a lot of power over this situation. Again, not with judgment, but like, actually at the time I did have a bit of judgment because it was like, look how hard I'm trying and I'm still sick and you're complaining, right?
Yes.
That was totally built into it. But I just got to see how she handled that. That was informative. And then a number of other people working through injuries and one kid who'd been hit by a truck, and someone like a young woman who was so weak and like on her, I don't know what kind of cancer she was working through. Like another friend recovering from a seizure. Like it was like a real mix. But I remember at one point towards the end of my time there, right? So, and they were really like, you don't need a wheelchair anymore. Now, I would still use one from time to time when I went out for like extended periods of time. If we're like a mall or something, I'd like voluntarily use one. Later on, when I'd fly, I would use one, right? But I didn't need it anymore. They really helped me get out of that and like learn like I could sit up, I can walk, maybe for only so long, but you can, and being able to stretch that and train it. In my like exit interview, one of the physical therapists had kind of dropped this idea of how I could think about things differently. Like imagine the blood, right? Because it was that my blood would pool and not come back up. She's like, imagine the blood like coming up and flowing up. And she's like, they found that like really like positive thinking can have such an influence. And I thought, what a bunch of hack. Like what a bunch of hooey. I was like, whatever.
Right,
Okay,
like
ma'am.
thinking thoughts is going to move
Right.
my
Thinking
blood.
thoughts is going to
Yeah,
like
yeah.
change what's happening. Okay. But that stuck with me because it seemed sort of odd to me and highly incredible. And later on, that ended up being part of what totally helped me heal on the deepest level. So I moved out from that, and then I continued with like a physical therapist in Savannah, and again, more training, but it always seemed like I only got so far. And there was a lot where people just didn't have answers. We're doing the best we can. Later on, I've had to work through a lot of traumatic memory associated with how much I was overriding some of the signals. And we talk about this because it's such a nuanced thing, right? Because there are times where where you're stretching yourself and showing yourself, no, see, I can do this, I'm safe. But there was also a degree to which I was like, we were just trying to make me physically well and pushing past all of the reasons my body was doing that.
Which we know is actually part of the problem of how you got there in the first place.
Exactly. So that can't be the solution because that's what led me there.
Yes.
Right? Like I remember I would look at, I'd be on like a reclined bicycle kind of thing. And then I eventually moved on to rowing machines because they found they were more effective. And it would say something like, if you feel dizzy or faint, stop. And I would laugh because I'm like, that's how I feel the entire time I'm doing any of this.
Yeah.
Right? Like, what's the point of this? So, at that point, it was interesting because, and I'm sharing these little tidbits of things that I notice, right, that speak to the mindset. What did I do? Okay, so part of how I had made progress all along the way was I would pick some sort of goal. I would pick something that I wanted to do that felt motivating, that would inform the specific skills I would need to have to be able to accomplish it. It would need to be flexible, but and I didn't actually know how I was going to be able to do it. I'm like, right now, I don't know that I can do that, but something deep within me thinks it just might be possible. Right. Mm-hmm. So I did that with, I went to my senior prom. I didn't get to sing one last time at school. Cause one of the things that I would do is I had taken extra credits like in middle school and high school. So in my senior year of high school, I only had to take one science credit to be eligible to graduate. I also stayed in because again, the anticipation, I'm jumping in the timeline, I know, to when I was still in high school, because I went to physical therapy, that was 2 years in. So that was about a year after I graduated high school. While I was still finishing my senior year of high school, the anticipation was that I would hit a point where I would get mostly better. Mm-hmm. And then I'd return. So I stayed in a small girls choir, and I would occasionally, my mom would like wheel me in and I'd be there for part of it, mostly lying on the floor. And then I'd go home and I carried out my like very simple oceanography class, whatever. Why am I jumping there? Oh, because the goal, that was one that I didn't get to do, was getting to sing. But what I did get to do was I graduated on time,
Mm.
which felt like an accomplishment at the time. And I walked across the stage. And so that's what helped me. I was like, okay, if I have to be able to stand up on my own and I have to be able to do it for this long. And I have to be able to take this many steps, right? So before I had gone to the physical therapy, I could walk some,
Mm-hmm.
but it was just really limited and usually supported by someone else before I would just instantly collapse. So I continued with the kind of rehabilitation on my own, worked partially with physical therapists. And I needed to make I needed another goal, right? Because those were the things, it was usually something very social or something artistic, some level of that kind of thing that motivated me to move forward. Um, so I ended up moving to Portland, Oregon, a year after doing the physical therapy program.
And where would you say your health was at that time?
Yeah. So I was, I still like getting well was my full-time job, right? Like I'd work out, I'd have to rest and recover. And then I was like trying to start to like work at reading, like training my eyes to be able to do that again because before I couldn't hold visual focus very well. And to like sit up for extended periods of time, starting to go out a little bit, but everything was like I could do some stuff, but it was just really, it was still kind of small. One of the things that I found though was that people would often compare me to how I had been before I'd gotten sick, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or to how I was at my sickest. So I was trying to assimilate to being well, right? I was like, I have to learn how to like be healthy. We were talking about that's like identity, right? It becomes such an identity. And I found it to be really challenging I'm like, I just need to like be present in the moment and people not constantly talking to me about how sick I had been or how well I used to be. And so,
Okay, I'm just reflecting back. I'm hearing that core push pull again.
yes,
Those extremes
it's the
that
extremes.
keep
Mm-hmm.
patterning,
Yes.
yeah.
And again, that was the response of my nervous system. That was the kind of thinking that I had. Even like how I grew up spiritually, there was a little bit more black and white.
Sure. Extremes,
Right? Heaven
hell,
and right. Heaven and hell,
wrong.
right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sinner, saint.
Yep.
Yeah. And I remember actually like speaking to like a bit of a like a scriptural understanding for me because again, that's the tradition that I come from. When I was getting ready to leave the children's hospital program initially after that like really intensive whatever 6 weeks or something, maybe it was only 4, I don't remember. My dad had a talk with me and oh, this makes me a little bit emotional because there are a few moments along the way where my dad would say things that were kind of these like openings to me of what was possible of being well. And I think he read something from a passage in the Bible in Joshua about like be strong and courageous, right? They were going into a new land. They weren't quite sure. It seemed a bit daunting. And he basically acknowledged, he's like, that I had gotten used to being sick.
Mm.
Like I had been sick for so long that this was basically the way of life that I knew. And that as I was leaving this program, I was coming into a greater state of wellness. And that might be a little bit scary because being sick had been what was more familiar. So that it was going to take some courage to step into this new unknown, even though in a way it was known, it was new again. Like it was a different kind of new now. And just like as a charge. Yeah.
Because the goal is so important. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
no, please. I've got a
we
little fumbly
so
too.
often think that the goal is to return back to our former state.
Yeah.
And I don't think our body's ever asking that of us actually in the journey.
No.
It's saying go like there's a reason
Mm-hmm.
we got to doing what we were doing. The goal is not to go back.
Right.
That's actually part of what we're moving away from.
Mm-hmm.
But so many times our mind is to get back to the place I was before I got sick.
Yeah. Okay. So later on, okay, and I don't remember at what point, my dad, again, one of those like pivotal, like where he was just like such a pillar of possibility and strength, whereas he had started praying when we'd pray together that my health would be restored, but not to what it had been before, but better than it had ever been.
Mm.
And at first, I was really angry. I was so mad because despite, all of this time and that I'd got mostly well, I still wasn't well.
Right.
And I had kind of started to look at things like, you know what? I might never be totally well, right? And again, for me, there was a faith component. So it was like, okay, I have been promised that there is this loving God and he cares for me, but he's promised me spiritual well-being. That part of my life is taken care of. But physical
She just
health,
gave me side eye.
I gave her like hard side eye. But physical health is not promised to me. So this might just be like, and this is what God has deemed for me.
Mm.
And so I will live within these confines. And
Just like all those spiritual leadership women that I'd seen and admired
exactly
from my childhood.
right. So you know what? Like this might just be like what my lot in life is. And okay, God, not my will, but yours. Clearly, I will state now, I do not believe that illness is God's will for anyone.
I have a book on that for any of you who
I have to speak though to this portion of things because that so colored my understanding and my worldview and so much. I mean, what we're looking at when we talk about mind change is what are our belief systems? And mine was heavily tied into this. There was a lot that was great from my spiritual community, but these were some like pieces that I took and had kind of twisted internally. Mm-hmm. So my dad would pray this prayer that my health would be not only what it had been, but better, not restored to its previous condition, but better than it had ever been in my life. And it would make me so angry because underneath I was so disappointed. I was so disappointed because I was like, I'm doing everything. I'm trying so hard. Right. And I'd thought that I was going to make this exponential recovery. Like I always thought that like I'd actually ultimately be well, but no matter what I do, it's like, it only seems to get so far. So I'd moved to Portland, Oregon. And part of it was a little bit of a fresh start, right? People didn't have all these different ways of comparing me, and I could just kind of learn the new normal of being more well. And because I recognized that, when you do a chronic illness, it's a whole system. It's a whole system of responses within family, right? Things become so conditioned. And I realized that I had to learn to do things on my own. And it was so hard not to say yes to the help. Like, it was like, if I have to crawl to get to the fridge, then I'm going to crawl to get to the fridge, but I have to be the one to do it because I need to know that I can, right? Again, still locked in with a mindset of struggle, right? Like now I'm like, I didn't need to crawl. Yeah, right. Let's deal with what was going on in my body that I thought that that's what needed to happen, right? I want to come back to this. This
is all retro.
This is retro.
Active.
Right.
Perspective. Yes.
But then moving to Portland, I had what felt like support of people that I knew. And the weather, I was doing all kinds of stuff about extreme weather sensitivity, right? Like my body couldn't regulate its temperature. So if I'm there, it'll be cooler and I'll recover faster. A lot more healthy food alternatives. And
I forgot that was a thing with the heat intolerance.
Oh yeah. Heat intolerance.
I totally forgot that.
Which I just want to stop for a moment to speak to. I have been with you in Texas. It is summer and I've been going for like jogs and it's so fun. Yeah. I'm like, oh, the sun feels great. This is how hot it is. Great. This has been one of the hottest summers that I've had. And I've been having the time of my life. And like, it's been part of what's made it feel amazing.
Yeah.
Like I'm out, I'm dancing, I'm seeing music concert. that was a big thing too, was like overstimulation. Right. I couldn't handle I would wear earplugs everywhere, like lights, volume on everything. And now I'm like in full on sensory absorption, hot dancing, wake up, feel great.
Yep.
So total transformation.
Okay, so how?
Right. Okay.
Like where you are now.
Yes.
What was your big?
Yeah. Okay.
Because the other thing to note is we've known each other for a very long time.
We have.
And you were still doing a lot of big chronic illness when I had stopped.
Yes.
And you knew that.
I did. And it scared me. It really intimidated me that someone who had been as sick as you were could be entirely well. And I think that it hit on the possibility that that might be true for me too. And the part of me that was using all that to protect stuff put up a major fight because I'd reach out to you a number of times. So I kept getting progressively better, but it was still only so far, right? Like
through the measure of illness.
Through the measure of illness.
That's
right.
the lens that we're using.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Uh-huh.
We're not using a wellness.
No.
A meter through wellness. We're using the lens of chronic illness.
Yes.
Where do I fall on this scale of wellness within chronic illness?
So it had gotten to a point where I decided that, okay, so I had a new cardiologist. And she basically had been like, yeah, you just hadn't looked at my history or whatever. I was like, yeah, here are the things you need to do. Like work out harder. You're going to have to be like super, super fit to combat this. But this is basically something that you're going to be working with for most of your life. Not a huge deal. You can still be like mostly well, but like, okay, you'll wear these kinds of tights. You should start doing weekly saline IVs. And I go and I do that. Yeah. I don't remember how long I did that because I couldn't seem to hold hydration, whatever. And it was a switch. Ooh, sorry, microphone. It was a switch for the prognosis that I had because I had this thing of ultimately I'm going to be well, right? Like there's a way there. And after being in Portland for a while, I was like, look at how much better I'm doing. There's a public transportation system. I can ride the bus and I'm not sick. Like I can walk around more. I can go upstairs. And I went to see my cardiologist back in Savannah and I was so excited to show him like how much progress I had made. And he wasn't particularly impressed. And I was like, wait, what? Like, I thought you were going to be like, pat me on the back. Like, look how great I'm doing. And the narrative had started to shift of, yeah, so you're going to mostly get better, but we're 4 years in now. Like, and this is where we are. It might be time to switch it. I'm like, how long am I looking at here? And he was like, maybe another 4. And something in like, because of how much it had taken me to get to where I was, something in me just kind of broke. Something in me broke and then just contracted in. And that's where I was like, you know what? If this is what it is, then I will learn to live within these confines and find a way. But there was still that hope of total wellness, right? So after a little while in Portland, I had the new cardiologist and she basically had said like, this is kind of a lifelong thing. And that flipped a little bit of something in me. At first, I accepted it and I made peace with it. And then I just was like, you know what? I think there's a way to ultimately be well. Like I can't, and again, I come from this faith background, right? So I look at, I'm like, if I don't think I want to do this, not as I will, but as you will thing, God. Like if you love me, like if I'm loved by the divine force of the universe, I'm willing to do things in a different way now, but I want to be well. And I think that there had come a point where I had stopped hoping because it had been so painful to be like on the edge of hoping and being disappointed, where I was like, I'm willing, whatever happens at the end of this, fine, but it's not going to be because I didn't hope with the whole of my heart.
Right. Comes back to fault. Yeah. Like I'm not doing enough.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I then had another new cardiologist, and she was like, you're quite young to be on so much medication and for where you are. And how old were you when you got sick? And she's like, okay, I think if there was a road that led you here, I wonder if there is a road back.
Bless those few
I know. Now,
medical people who, yeah.
now she set me on the road more so of I went further into medical stuff, started trying different, like I ended up picking up some more diagnoses. I tried more medications, but also of the idea of like naturopathic. I met someone who my family had known who did Qigong and started working with breathing. He sent me a lot of stuff about visualization too, and about the body's ability to heal itself. And so that was a planting for me, right?
All these little seeds.
All these little seeds are there. All the while I know that you've like done this thing, but I don't know what it is. And it seems kind of weird. I would like listen to it a little bit about like, okay, like you work with like a memory, or you have like how your thinking can change things. And I instantly took that too. And I try like, I didn't really understand, but I tried to implement what little bit I knew, and it didn't work, which reinforced it's my fault.
Yeah.
Right. But all these little seeds of like the connection coming were falling. And I started doing different kinds of physical therapy. And I had therapists who were more on the like body worker side. And the idea of trauma started coming in. The idea of being like connected to yourself and to your spirit started coming in. And there was even a point where, because at this point there had been so much physical, I feel like my body speaking to me started to become more acutely emotional.
Yeah.
And that came out in physical therapy sessions even. There was one point I remember, I don't know what happened, but I just started crying out of nowhere, like intensely. And I told the therapist, I was like, I promise I'm not emotional. And he just went, it's all emotional.
Aww.
And helped me calm down. And that, again, these little seeds stuck with me. So I, through this process, am getting to the point where I would almost reach out to you. And then I'd be like, I don't know about this. And I didn't even understand why I felt this. Like, again, it's that same dynamic, right? That was at the core, this push pull. Are things my fault? I'm helpless. I have no responsibility. Like that was the dynamic of parts
I
of
need help. I don't need help.
Exactly.
I can do it on my own, but I might need, it's such a push pull.
So I remember at one point I contacted you with the purpose of being like, so what are you doing? And didn't talk about that at all. We talked about something else entirely. I never got there. But then I started what helped me get even deeper into the mind-body connection. I had a friend who's a doctor, who's a naturopathic doctor, and started working with me. And he was the one who was like, vaccine injury. I think that might be a component of this. Now, I see that in the couch of there was a lot of other stuff already going on, right? That my body processed or didn't process things the way that it did. But as I worked with him, I was also listening to more of the stuff that you had started to be sharing. And so I started working on the way I represented things internally and what my belief systems were. And as I did that, I was also doing work with him, and I was coming in, I represent a lot physically. Like we'll talk about that later on about like why certain modalities work really well for different people. And things with a strong body base, I tend to resonate with. And so I was working with someone who had the kind of relationship that I had with this doctor, I think really influenced it. Such a gentle male presence from my community, who was very trusted and met me with such understanding. But then also I started dealing with parts of physically how I had represented different aspects of trauma and how I was internally representing. As some of those things started to shift, all kinds of things shifted. I mean, I remember at one point, one of the first big ones that I had was realizing that in my mind, there was a part of me that had still seen myself in a wheelchair. I hadn't been using one for a few years, but mentally, how I viewed myself was still there. And so as I healed that and saw myself coming and walking, the next day, I had always had this sort of antagonism with my legs. Not trying anything. I just felt this immense affection for my legs. I literally was like, wow, those are amazing. Like kissed them. I did a cartwheel and I was like, okay, all right. I really can do anything. And that started me all of those things, the like collection of experiences with all these different body workers, starting to hear more about this idea of what's the connection between the attunement between your head and your heart, like the signals that are going through and how that related to whatever diagnosis that I'd had, led me to finally coming to you and being like, okay, so this thing that you're doing, I'm kind of already on this path. Like I'm having my own experiences and I'm kind of healing. But if what you're doing is faster and more effective, then I wanna try this. And I think at that point too, I'd shared with you, I was like, and I think I'm gonna want to study this to learn it from the inside out. I might end up wanting to do this. And I remember though from our first session, I said, but first let's see if it works.
Right.
Do you remember that?
I do.
And I saw the look on your face like, oh, okay. Because I was really skeptical.
Oh, so skeptical.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And I actually knew too that first time you called me, I had an idea. I'm like, she didn't ask me anything about, like, it was so purposefully avoided.
So purposely avoidant.
That I was like, oh, that's what she was really calling about. But of course I think, gosh, thank goodness by that time, I had learned to let people come to the work rather than bring it to people.
Yes.
Because, it really needs to be something somebody comes to.
I deeply believe that. There are times now where people have seen my recovery and what I'm doing, like they want me to try to like, you should share this with them. And I'm like, I do talk, but I don't really seek people out. I really believe that when people are ready for it, and not like a ready in terms of deserving, but there's a level of safety that's been built around it where they're like, okay, I can take this in the way that I need to now. They end up finding us.
And it's different for everybody.
It's totally different
like
for every person.
Talking about your journey and how you got open to the mind change work is different than mine.
Yeah.
And will be different for so many people.
Yeah.
But yes. Okay. So then we did some sessions.
Okay.
What did you think when you first, because people are like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Right?
So this idea, and I know that there are people with chronic illnesses who get a lot of, this is all in your head. And that's like a really like resistant thing. I hadn't encountered that with doctors as much. So that didn't hit. I think, I want to go back to this because you know how you were sharing your big first mind change moment, right? Was what if I'm doing this to myself? And that being the thing that gave you a sense of power. I was thinking about this, I think yesterday, and I realized the one for me was, I don't remember. I watched something and knowing that you had made the recovery too, knowing that I actually could get well. Like I actually really could be healthy and well because it had kind of been couched within these limitations, right? I had this thought, how it came into my head was, I can be the woman I was created to be. Like I actually can be the woman I was created to be. And I started waking up with more energy each day. And that was what drove me forward, being like, okay, I'm going to do this. Okay, I can do this. Like there's going to be fruit at the end of what I'm planting. So first couple of sessions, it was really, really different. I remember you saying things like you would kind of like, I would say, I'm feeling something and you'd bring it to like a metaphor of what that might represent for me and being so like, what? No, that's not what this is about. I was like, I feel this pain in my back as we get there and being like, oh, okay, stabbing myself in the back. And I was like, no, what? Because the belief systems that I had were being so challenged, were being so twisted. And at the end of the first session, I remember there was something that I couldn't quite shift. And part of it had to do with my relationship with them. I was like, I had come to, this is what made me sick. This is what it is, right? So coming to this is actually produced from within, I had a lot of resistance to in part because of the relationship that I had with someone who had helped me come to that conclusion. And that had been where I had found so much of a sense of the understanding, the safety, that I had been I think really needing. And so again, it tied right into, I wasn't ready to let go of that either or push pull.
Yeah.
That's the dynamic constantly that we were really, really moving out of and reframing into one of harmony and wholeness and of choices, as opposed to things being so either or.
And we call that in the work secondary gains.
Secondary gains, that's right.
And we'll talk a lot about that as we go through. But the it's not something we consciously do. It's a subconscious program. It's a subconscious way of dealing with things. For instance, if I, like for you using that example, if I don't see it in the way that this person sees it, I lose the person.
Right.
I lose the relationship. So staying in alignment with this medical model, or this is what made me sick, and putting the power outside. It's the thing that happened that made me sick.
Yeah.
Which really you start to realize, like, oh wait, that's disempowering and victimization. But to let go of that means I'd let go of this person.
Which also shows you, again, part of the dynamic of how I was doing what I was doing was thinking that I had to be in perfect alignment. I had to agree with everything or everyone around me.
To stay in relationship.
To stay in relationship. And we really come from this understanding that relationship is necessary to our health. It's part of our biological drive. Those connections, usually our secondary gains are tied to those kinds of connections. And so those are layers that we have to end up kind of working through.
And we take that from childhood often when we're quite little, and we realize that to be in disagreement with a parent could be seen as disobedient or rebellious, and those are not good things.
Right.
And sometimes that gets wired in as, oh, if I disagree, the love is taken from me, or the acceptance is taken from me. And as a child, we still need to be in alignment with the love and acceptance. And so our parents ideally are very regulated and emotionally intelligent people, but unfortunately, that's not what they were given. No one's modeled that for them. They don't live in a world where that's really prevalent. So doing the best they can, not realizing what we're taking in with our tiny little brains, not that they're tiny in size, but we're so little and we don't have everything on board yet to think abstractly.
We have a limited perspective.
Very limited perspective.
That's a lot more associative.
Right. So it makes sense. So many of us still, as adults, have that, oh, if I don't agree, we can't be together.
Yeah.
And we lose that connection and that love through disagreement. And then who we end up disagreeing with is ourselves. And then we lose connection with us.
And that's how it ended up overriding so much of what my body was speaking, right? That's where those appropriate limits.
This is how we do dysautonomia.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
The appropriate limits, right? That's the piece of the trauma. I'm doing air quotes. I mean, it is that I ended up having to work through secondarily through physical therapy. And that was the heart of it, was not tuning into and listening to what I felt. Even when I was sharing about how I'd feel bad if I didn't feel bad enough for what other people were going through, right? It's, I have to align my body into agreement with what's going on around me. Instead
when it was screaming.
When it was,
for your attention, which is another thing that we've talked about in the past, that the mind change method is built on a handful of tenets of belief systems that really inform everything that we do. And I know one of them that you said was so important
is that my body is for me, right? Like the sense of conflict, my body was modeling the sense of conflict, but the conflict was within me. And like I thought my body was against me. So I was trying to override it or force it into submission or just completely give into it. Like I had no sense of control. There wasn't the sense of this is a conversation. We're working together. And that everything was coming from a really good place and from absolute wisdom. Like I really believe in the inherent wisdom of our bodies and the problems that we have, the illnesses we have. They aren't the thing it's not like I have to get rid of this so I can be healthy. It's like we think the problem is the problem, right?
Right.
That's the most common thing. We think and I find this with my clients too. They want to like get rid of their anxiety, quote unquote. But that's the messenger. That's the information that's leading you into what it is you need to connect with and heal within yourself for that fullness. And then there isn't a conflict in your body when you're listening.
And so, I mean, we could
I know I probably went
go.
way longer than
That's okay. We all, but
needed.
what does wellness
Yeah,
look like for you now
sure. Ah,
or feel like or
yeah,
sound like?
sure.
Yeah.
I think part of it is just like knowing I'm really okay no matter what. Like
Mm.
I really believe in our inherent goodness. Like we are we are good, we are made. We have some things, ways that we've learned to adapt, but that comes from like a pure motivation as well. And so there's not judgment, there's no condemnation, and like there's a freedom to have I think in terms of like harmony now, like, oh, we have different voices. Oh, I can even have within myself these different reactions, and yet they all can work together to make fuller music. Um, and so I have a real sense of vitality. I think that's been the word I've been
Mm.
kind of keying into more this year is integrity, right? And if you and as you're hearing me speak, right, about all these opposing, this conflict, these different things, it's like, how do I make it all fit? It's like, no, how does this all work together?
Right.
Right?
Using that word integrity and
Yeah.
integrous as a way of bringing everything together into
Into
alignment.
alignment. Yeah.
Yes.
And vitality, the more that and I mean, there continue to be layers of like, oh, this is how I'm thinking about this. Oh, no wonder I'm so exhausted. Right. And so when I have something come up, I actually get kind of excited now because I'm like, oh, there's something more for me to get to tune into. And I end up having even more vitality on the other side of it. So, yeah, it's a lot more active, playful. I mean, I run around New York City. It's a better quality of friendships, I think, and getting to enjoy them more. I feel like I just feel so secure and safe within myself and within my body and with like whatever happens, whatever comes up. There's this underlying sense of peace and comfortability. And then just curiosity about everything, getting to
Mm.
continue learning and studying. There's, I think, a letting go of some sort of idea of mistakes, but everything is like, oh, this really is like not a euphemism of this is a growth opportunity or learning opportunity, but like excitingly as such. Yeah, I think I feel really like I feel embodied. And, when I talked about before being so dissociated from myself and like horizontal, like it's funny because I used to think in terms of a horizontal. Now, like metaphorically, I end up thinking about things being in alignment. I think in a vertical. I think about, I have, oh, dang it. I was going somewhere with that. What was I talking about? I've said so much. It's probably enough, but I love being alive. I just love being alive. I love the like little moments. I love the big ones. And it just feels like life just keeps getting better. So I'm excited that we get to keep exploring and keep learning and share what we've been kind of collecting along the way.
And now you're one of our mind change practitioners.
I am. Yes.
Now this is like what you do, helping other people.
Yeah.
And how exciting is that it comes full circle? And not just that, because it isn't just, okay, I've arrived as a mind change practitioner, not at all.
No.
Because what it is it's helping flesh out the system.
Yeah.
It's helping grow the mindset. And it's just everybody that is a part of the mind change team has been on their own journey and believes in it so much because of their own experience and actually adds to what it is.
Yes. And that's okay. So again, the difference you can tell within my sense of like, what is wellness now before, right? Where there was that sense of conflict of things are different. Like, how do I make all these different things somehow fit together? There's this embracing of, I do have a slightly different perspective than you. I do have a slightly different than Kent. And I'm like, oh, that's great. This is what I get to add, right? Like I get to help fill in. That's the gift. That's the beauty. That's the great thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ooh, I love it. Thank you.
Thank
you for
you.
sharing. Thank you
Yeah.
for doing. I mean, it's been such a great journey to see. And it's cool too. And again, something I don't know that we stop and think about enough, but like, oh, wow, look at all the people we love
Yeah.
who are getting well to a degree that we didn't think, like we didn't have a framework for before.
Yeah.
And it's really cool to see that, and how much more, gosh, not only can we start holding frameworks out there,
Yeah.
because you saw people and thought, oh, if they can do it, I can do it.
Right.
And yet now, if we just keep expanding that, I'm like, how far can we go? Anyway, thanks again for joining. This has been great. The culmination of so many years of planning and thinking and experiencing. So look forward to hearing more.
Thanks, Heather.
Thank you.